Shalom, welcome to this week's edition of the Pilichowski page on video and your local, or I shouldn't say local, but your news update for Israel advocates on All About Israel. This week we have a lot of interesting discussions about whether or not Iran is rational. And the question is, what's the difference if Iran is rational or not, and why is it that we find that the world is discussing this at this point? And it seems to be, from my analysis, that there's a coordinated effort in this discussion between British intelligence, American intelligence, the British Army, the American Army, and the diplomatic corps of both countries. Let me explain what I mean. Discussion that we find both on with America's chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the head of America's military, and the British foreign minister, both giving interviews to two different news agencies in their own country, is whether or not Iran is rational. Now, whether a country is rational or not is going to greatly determine how other countries deal with that country. And let's instead of giving examples and analogies, let's talk directly in terms of Iran. Whether or not Iran is a rational country. If Iran is a rational country, then what you're going to find is the way we deal with this country is going to greatly change. If Iran is rational, then we can have diplomatic relations with Iran and talk to them in a diplomatic way. We can have a hope that talks with them are going to convince them that having a nuclear weapon is not a good idea. If we have to sanction them, we'll sanction them, but we're hoping that they, and as a rational country, making rational decisions, they think primarily about the good of their own citizens. Sanctions would hurt their own citizens, and therefore they would try to avoid them. If there's a carrot at the end of the stick that's being offered, then they'll realize that that's good for their country, that's a rational decision that they can make, and therefore they'll go ahead with that decision. And that's basically how normal rational countries deal with other rational countries. The minute a country is no longer rational, the minute its leadership is thinking in terms of not what's best for its own citizens, but they have other calculations that they're going to make, whether they be religious ones, whether they be ones that are in the best interests of the dictators that run the country, then all of a sudden rational countries can't deal with them in a rational manner. And then we have to start thinking about military options. When it comes to Iran, if we determine that Iran is not acting in a rational manner, then we have to go to military options. Now, a lot of times, because a country will have predetermined that it's best for them not to deal with the country militarily, so therefore not to take military action, they might end up hoping that the country is rational. Let's take that with Iran. America and Britain both don't want to attack Iran. Another war, coming off of a war in Afghanistan and a war with Iraq, won't do well for our own countries. It's not in the best interests of the United States and the best interests of Britain to automatically jump into a war, nor is it in the best interests of Israel. War is always a last option. We're hoping that Iran is rational. We're hoping that this latest round of sanctions that will occur will convince Iran that they shouldn't go after a nuclear weapon. And therefore, this week, what we find is that literally today and yesterday, both the heads of the British Foreign Ministry and the head of the American military have both said that they assume that Iran is rational, and therefore they say it would be a bad idea on Israel's part to attack, and that they're not, being America and England, are not planning on attacking anytime soon. Now, let's take a step back and ask ourselves: is Iran really a rational country? I don't know as much as the heads of the American military and the American intelligence, nor the British, but I find it hard to believe, coming from statements of Ahmadinejad, that he has a direct connection to God, that he is supposed to harbor in the coming of their Messiah with an apocalyptic war that's going to take place in Palestine. I find that that's going to require the destruction and annihilation of the Jewish people and the Zionist regime that's currently residing in Palestine. I find it hard to take this man as rational. And his latest move, coming on the heels of being called a rationalist by the rest of the world, is that he has just almost sanctioned France and other European countries by saying that we're going to cut off shipments of oil to them or greatly reduce shipments of oil to them, almost putting into effect sanctions that have yet to take effect on him. You might ask, why would he do such a thing? And the answer is very simple. He's not acting in a rational manner. He's trying to show the world that he could punish them by not shipping oil to them before they're ready to accept sanctions of not having Iranian oil. In other words, the rest of the world has decided 4.5 months from now they'll begin sanctions against Iran and stop purchasing oil from Iran. The reason why they need that window of the next 4.5 months, which they set into place a month and a half ago, really being 6 months, is because they need to start purchasing oil from other places. Iran has said, wait a minute, you think in 6 months you're going to stop buying oil from us when you have enough oil from other places? We're going to put those sanctions into effect now. It's not the act of a rational country. A rational country at this point would have realized that gaining a nuclear weapon is not in their best interest, and therefore they would have stopped their aspirations for a nuclear weapon. I find it hard to believe that we're really going to accept Ahmadinejad, the Ayatollahs, and the rest of the Iranian leadership acting in a rational manner when they're trying to get nuclear weapons, when the rest of the world is telling them basically stop or we're going to have to attack you militarily. And I think that's the conclusion that Israel's made, and that's why the rest of the world, at the same time that they're saying Iran is acting in a rational manner, are also saying things along the lines of Israel might very well attack either this spring or this coming September or October. I think that's the direction that it seems like we're going in, where the rest of the world is praying that sanctions work, begging Israel not to attack until those sanctions work, but at the same time recognizing that these sanctions are not really working, that Iran is bringing in the sanctions early in order to try to quote-unquote punish the world, and I think that we're in for some trouble. Please read more of this analysis on the Pilichowski page, and please click on the links of read more, so you'll be able to determine this information on your own, not trust my analysis, but really be able to determine on your own what's happening out there.